Well, hello there, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Two Sons podcast. I am your co-host today, Philip, and this is a little solo episode for you guys. There's really no conflict with me and my brother's recordings. We do plan to put out a episode for I believe, episode 9 of season 3 of the Bad Batch. Whether that is going to be tonight or tomorrow or sometime this weekend, I am not sure. But in the meantime, I wanted to give you guys some content to listen to just in case we do not record tonight. And I don't want to leave you guys high and dry with no content to finish off your week with. So, with that being said, I'm kind of doing like a little bit of an impromptu solo episode today. I'm sitting here on my computer. I had a couple of, bills and just some other things to go over today. So I thought I'd take advantage of my day off to put out a nice little episode for you guys today. And to be honest, I didn't really know what to talk about. But then, as I sat here and I was doing some thinking, I happened to see this lovely little creature right here, sitting on my desk. And beside that, I also have this lovely, really nice book right here. Very lovely hardcover book. And by the title, you can see it on the side, you can see it on the front. Without giving too much away or, using context clues, I decided that I am going to talk about Dune today. Now, I seen Dune Part 1, and I just more recently saw Dune Part 2 about a week or two ago. And unfortunately, my brother has not had the chance to go see those movies yet, but I have. So I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to sit down and just talk to you guys about those movies. We haven't really done any Dune related content on the channel before, so I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to just express my thoughts about the films, what I liked about it so far, how I'm enjoying the franchise, and, just so on and so forth. So I thought we just kind of have a nice, relaxing episode today. Before we get into the episode today, I just want to thank you guys for all the love and support as always. I've seen some recent subscribers to the YouTube channel and as well as the Spotify. So for those of you that are joining the Two Sons podcast family, welcome. We always appreciate all the love and support. My brother did tell me that we did have a country added to our list, but I will wait for the both of us to be recording to announce that country to everybody. But for those of you that are from that country, welcome. Thank you for joining the Two Sons podcast family. We're very happy to have you. I've been posting a couple of shorts on YouTube recently, so if you have not seen those, please go check those out. A couple of the House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, a little bit of Lego, just little things I see here and there, kind of compile them into a nice little edit and just post it to the YouTube channel. So again, thank you guys for liking and leaving comments on those. I really do appreciate it. And again, all the love and support recently that we've gotten for our review of season 3 of The Bad Batch has been really nice. My brother was just telling us how our most recent video on the Bad Batch episode breakdowns was actually one of the most viewed ones recently. So thank you guys so much for tuning in on there as well as the YouTube. And yeah, with that being said, if you guys want to find more content like the one I just described, or the episode that I'm going to release today, and future episodes we are going to release, you could find us on the follow social media platforms. So we are on Instagram, X, formerly known as Twitter, and Facebook, all under Two Sons Podcast. This is with an O, not a U, because we are two brothers. We are also on TikTok at Two Sons Podcast. That is what I control. That's basically how I get the word out about the YouTube and all the other episodes that we post. So please go follow us on there if you want a more up to date um, viewing experience. And then I've also actually been taking clips from our episodes and actually posting them on the TikTok. So you guys can kind of get a little bit of a preview about what the episode is going to be out before you watch it. So thank you guys for tuning in and checking those out. I really do appreciate it. But besides those couple of social media platforms, you could also find us on Spotify and YouTube, all under Two Sons Podcast. Again, that's with an O, not a U, because we are two brothers. So those of you that have been following us for a while now know that I take most of the control when it comes to the YouTube and the TikTok. So anything that you see on there is part of my work, whether it comes to the title or the description. If you guys have any advice or anything that I could do to kind of spice up the YouTube channel, make it look, as good as possible, or just put out the best content for you guys, please let me know. Obviously, the YouTube comments and the TikTok comments are open to suggestions, as well as all the social medias that I just posted. We always love your guys' feedback. So anything that you could give us to maybe just make our podcast a little bit better, we would always appreciate and be willing to listen. So with that being said, now that I got all of the spiel stuff out of the way, we are just going to jump into today's episode. So obviously, like I said, we're going to be talking about Dune. So for those of you that don't know what Dune is, I'm going to give you a little bit of a synopsis, really. So the world of Dune was created by the author known as Frank Herbert. Now, I could possibly butcher these dates, so I apologize in advance if I do. But if I'm not mistaken, the first book, let me actually see if the book itself tells me when it was created, so I do not butcher it. Give me 1 second here. Let me see if I could find it. Be nice if I could find it. Okay, here we go. Gotcha. All right. So the book actually provided when the it came out. So an author by the name of Frank Herbert, which is a well-known sci-fi and fantasy author and writer, created the first Dune book back in 1965. So this is going to be, I believe, Star Wars has already came out at this point. There were a couple of other sci-fi projects that have obviously already been out, such as Star Trek and Star Wars. But this was before, projects such as Lord of the Rings. I mean, of course, the books were obviously written at this time, but the film adaptations and the show adaptation had a long way to go. So other franchises such as Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit were also out at this time, but only in novel form. So again, Frank Herbert created this whole new sci-fi fantasy realm um, for everybody's reading pleasure, pretty much, and it has been known as Dune. So, like I said, the first book came out in 1965, and from there, there have been multiple sequels. There have been books that are dedicated to the main story of Dune. There are books that deal with like some side stories or like some prequels and everything. From what I understand, Frank Herbert and his wife basically wrote as many books for Dune as they possibly could. And then unfortunately, we did have Frank Herbert pass away. I want to say sometime in like the 1970s. So he did not, I guess, I think where the Dune story finished, I think he was pretty satisfied with how the story finished. But if he was still alive, I think he would have written more stories. There obviously has been some controversy as you get further on in the Dune series because it does become a little bit more eccentric. Um, Really, everybody kind of just narrows down on the first three books because that's where like you think like your main entree is, so to speak, when it comes to the written content. And then these spin-offs after that are kind of like the sequel trilogy for Star Wars. They've had a mixed reputation. And like you said, as you get further into the books, it just becomes a little bit more interesting, is the right word for it. So not really too many people talk about the sequel books when it comes to Dune. I mean, the way I see it is that the first three books are like the main story of Dune or like the Dune trilogy, and then the books after that are what you consider the sequel trilogy. So the sequel trilogy is going to focus on Paul Atreides' children, and those books basically center around his children and the events that happen during that time. So you can definitely say that they are split between two parts. So you have the Dune original trilogy, and then you have the Dune sequel trilogy. So like I said, the first book came out in 1965. And the first book, which is just titled Dune, was actually made into the films recently. So Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 basically encompass all of the first book of Dune. Um, and then obviously Dune Messiah, which is the second book, will be covered in the third movie. Obviously, fingers crossed. But it does seem like they are going to be making a Dune Messiah movie or just a Dune Part 3 movie, whatever they end up calling it, to finish out that trilogy. So obviously, that movie is going to cover the events of Dune Messiah. So we assume that depending on obviously how this franchise does, with the movie adaptations, that, the final book of the trilogy, Children of Dune, will be possibly covered in some sort of future TV series. I know they're coming out with a TV series that is a Dune prequel, which is about the Bene Gesserit, which takes place like 10,000 years before the events of Dune. And I think it's supposed to show how they Bene Gesserit set up the whole prophecy and the religious beliefs on Arrakis, which obviously plays heavily into the events that we see in the movies today. So again, we're getting a lot of love for Dune recently. I mean, obviously after the novels came out, there was a movie that came out, I think back in the 1980s. That was definitely had mixed reviews. Definitely again kind of played on that more eccentric style of film and animation. There wasn't really too much animation. It was pretty much all live action, but it was interesting to say the least. I haven't watched it, but I've seen a couple of clips from it, and they've definitely done a better job in in more recent years than back in the 1980s. However, I did hear that there was actually a very popular Children of Dune TV series that I believe came out in the early 2000s or around that like 1999 2000 mark, and I heard it actually was pretty good. I think again, I think it received mixed reviews, but I think it was a lot. It was better adapted than the original Dune movie. And I think a lot of people forget about some of these earlier film and TV adaptations just because they might have been so obscure that really nobody heard of them, or they just didn't gain the traction that other franchises like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, has been able to catch, in the 21st century. It seems like, the Dune books, however popular they were, I mean, obviously, I never heard of Dune, to be honest, until I heard that the first movie was coming out. So that just kind of goes to show that, a franchise like this has unfortunately been like kind of like left out of the limelight. But again, thankfully, because of the recent movie adaptations, it looks like it's making a comeback. And honestly, I'm all here for it. I mean, I love the sci-fi fantasy genre, so I would really love for this movie trilogy to do really well. And I would love to see some spin-off and other adaptations in the future for Dune, because I think it definitely is a popular or an on the rise franchise. You have seen a lot of Dune fans come back like out of hiding and like embrace like the fact that they like this franchise. And you have some newcomers to the franchise, such as myself, really falling in love with it and wanting to learn more about the world building and just the story in general. Besides obviously movies and TV shows, they are also making a Dune game, I believe, called Dune Awakening. So it's going to be like an open world experience where I think you explore Arrakis. So that will be really interesting. I wonder how that is going to play out. So obviously, I've just listed a lot of multimedia, projects that they are working on for Dune. So, fingers crossed that these franchises, do work out and that, Dune, gets the recognition it deserves. So, now that I've kind of covered a little bit of the history, we're basically going to get into the story of Dune, and at least, as it refers to these first two movies. So going back, looking at Dune Part One, I would definitely give Dune Part One, I think, a solid 9 out of 10. I think the reason why I'm giving it a 9 out of 10 is because it was a lot of story building and world building, so there wasn't really too much action. And again, just kind of my own personal opinion, I do like a little bit of action and adventure, like in my films, especially when they have to do with like sci-fi and fantasy. Um, so, I do docket points for that because I didn't know that this was only part one. I mean, I didn't realize that there was going to be part two. So I guess that's a little bit on like my naivety. Um, Now that there is a part two, I think I would probably change that score to at least a 10 out of 10. Excuse me, because they do a really good job of, like I said, the world building, setting the stage, and then obviously Dune Part Two knocks it out of the park. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. So basically, I think what the film did really well for Dune Part One is that, like I said, it did exceptional world building. So it covered a couple of the key planets, such as the ruling planet for House Har Harkonnen. I'm totally butchering that. I apologize. It covered the world building good for House Atreides and where they're from, and then obviously Arrakis. Um, they did a really good job showing, the power and the expanse of the Spacing Guild. Because for those of you that don't know, the Spacing Guild is how people get from planet to planet or basically do space travel. The Spacing Guild is basically like Dune's version of hyperspace for Star Wars. So I think they did a really good job expanding upon that and like just showing kind of how unique and weird, these Spacing Guild members are, and just showing this giant, massive ship that the Spacing Guild seems to use to kind of jump from planet to planet was really interesting. They do more of the like political building. I would say more in like Dune Part Two. I mean, obviously they give you hints of it in Dune Part One because obviously the story basically encompasses over the fact that there is this galactic empire that is in the world of Dune, right? And obviously within the empire there are these great noble houses, and lesser houses that kind of rule over their own planets, and they obviously answer back to the emperor. So the emperor at the time has devised this plan with Harnigan or Harrigan um, to get rid of House Atreides. Because, I guess to the Emperor and this other house, they're seen as too trustworthy, too loyal. They fear that they are gaining too much power, among the other houses and the lesser houses, and that they could be a real threat to the political structure. So the Emperor and House Harnigan devises a plan to basically give lordship, lordship over Araxes to House Atreides. And, basically they're going to have them take over the spice harvesting operations from House Harnigan and give them the House Atreides. Now, obviously on paper, this looks like a great honor because obviously spice is one of the main currencies of the Dune universe. This is what metats, which are basically like human computers, and the Spacing Guild use to do space travel. So it is a very highly profitable and important resource in the Dune world. So obviously, House Harnigan had the ability to harvest this on Araxis, but because they set a plan in motion, they gave it over to House Atreides. So right away, obviously, House Atreides is skeptical about all this, especially Duke Leto the First, which is obviously Paul Atreides' father, played by Oscar Isaac, is very skeptical about this because he has a feeling that this is a trap. But because he is such a genuine and loyal man, he is going to do the duty to the Empire and to his house, so he accepts the stewardship over Araxis. So obviously, this is where we get more introduced into House Atreides and their families. So obviously, we have Jessica, who is actually Duke Leto's concubine. He's actually not his wife. And unfortunately, he never had the chance to make Jessica his wife, which he does mention towards the end of part one. But we see that she is a Bene Gesserit. And basically, you can kind of think of the Bene Gesserit as force wielders in the Dune universe. Basically, they have the ability to see into the past, present, and future. The Bene Gesserit are a sacred order of women. So Paul is technically one of the first men to actually join the order or have the abilities to wield the powers of the Bene Gesserit. They are only able to look into the memories of their female ancestors, which is why somebody like Paul becomes so important because they call him the Kwisatz Haderach, which basically means that he's kind of the chosen one to be able to wield the Bene Gesserit powers and not only see his female ancestors' memories, but also his male ancestors' memories. So obviously, the Bene Gesserit for over thousands of years have done this kind of like selective breeding process, among the noble houses to create this Kwisatz Haderach. And originally, the Bene Gesserit tasked Jessica to give birth to a daughter for House Atreides, so then they could eventually marry her off to a male heir of House Harnigan to create the Kwisatz Haderach. However, Jessica's love for Leto actually had her give birth to a son, which is Paul. And obviously, we see that Paul is being trained by Jessica in the ways of the Bene Gesserit, as well as also being a noble prince to a house. So he kind of has, both sides going for him recently. So I don't really want to get too much into the explanation of the movies and everything because we'll be sitting here forever, and unfortunately, I do not have enough time to cover something like that. But like I said, they do a really good job with the world building. So you were introduced to Araxis and just kind of the political and environmental impact of that planet. And obviously, with the introduction of Araxis, you're giving a better introduction to spice. So obviously, like I said, it's very important, um, you know, material, material that is essential for the Dune universe. You're giving a really good introduction to the Fremen, which is the local population of desert inhabitants on Araxis, and you're also given a pretty good introduction into the sandworms, which are these giant beasts, basically this little guy right here, that inhabit the world of Araxis. And obviously, they do have a special relationship to the Fremen, which is also explored. It's explored more in the second movie, but basically, when it comes to the aspects of world building, you're introduced to a couple of planets. You're introduced to the political structure of the universe. And we are also given a little bit of an insight into some of the cultures and the different organizations. So, like I said, the Fremen, the Bene Gesserit, and the Spacing Guild are really the main three that we're kind of given a really good introduction into. Um, I think the film does a good job, like kind of exploring Paul Atreides' life, and obviously showing that he is kind of plagued by these visions or dreams, that could be, kind of contributed to his Bene Gesserit training, which obviously becomes of great importance when the family takes over lordship of Araxis, because obviously when the events eventually incur in the movie, and obviously, they are betrayed by the Emperor and House Harnigan. Most of House Atreides is slaughtered along with Paul's father, Leto the First. So, as far as House Atreides is concerned, you only have Paul Atreides, you have his mother Jessica, and you have Duncan Idaho, as well as a guy by the name of Gurney that survived, that are really just kind of the main characters from House Atreides. I mean, unfortunately, we see Duncan Idaho pass away later in the film, so really you only have those three survivors left when we get into Dune Part Two. But you really see Paul's story kind of expedite after the fall of House Atreides, when he is learning to tap more into his Bene Gesserit powers, and obviously, when he arrives on Araxis, because of Bene Gesserit propaganda and story pushing, so to speak, the Fremen of that world kind of have this religious belief of the Lisa An, which is basically the voice from the outer world. They believe that this prophet from off world is going to come and save their people and basically turn Araxis back into a tropical paradise that it once was. So obviously, it just so happens that this prophet is a male, and obviously Paul is fitting that description, or we think that he's fitting that description to a T. And we see that throughout the rest of the film that he starts to slowly kind of embrace this religious figure. I think more of as a political move in the very beginning, because obviously we see him use it kind of to maybe gain favor with the emperor, or like maybe gain the backing of the Fremen and the other houses to kind of overthrow the emperor, and become emperor himself. So we see him kind of tap into this, like Lisan Kaib, like movement as a political move at first. But then obviously in part two we'll see that it becomes much more than a political move, and it becomes more of a religious move as well. So I think they really do a good job of introducing Paul Atreides and like kind of like laying the groundworks for his story. I think for the short time that we see them in the film, I think they do a really good job of introducing the Fremen to Dune Part One. They kind of give you a sneak peek really into like what their lifestyle and society is like. They obviously do that a lot more in Part Two, but they do a pretty good job introducing it in Part One. Um, I think they really do a good job of setting up like the antagonists for the film, because obviously there are multiple, but I think they do a good job setting up the Emperor as well as House Harnigan as the antagonist of the film. Like I said, especially with their plot to betray House Atreides, and just their savage brutality against the people of Araxis and Fremen, and even to themselves. I think they do a really good job of outlining that and kind of showing these like battle lines between like who people are going to support pretty much. Overall, obviously the cinematography and the soundtrack is phenomenal for Dune Part One, so I think they really do a great job um, where that is concerned. Really setting up this desert landscape where most of the movie takes place is obviously essential to the film, and I think they do a really good job with that. And like I said, originally I was kind of confused because I didn't realize that there was going to be a part two for Dune. So when it just kind of ended like anticlimactically, I was left asking questions. But now that I've seen Dune Part Two, I think they do a really good job with the storytelling and kind of setting up most of the meal, so to speak, in the first movie. That way you can enjoy it a lot more in Dune Part Two. Um, Really, there are no negatives for the film because I'm still new to the Dune franchise. I feel like it's kind of biased of me to like really speak on anything negative because I'm still learning about it myself. But from multiple videos that I watched and from what I've read in the book so far, I don't really have any negatives to cover. Like I said, I think they did a pretty good job. Obviously, they did a couple things different from the books. Um, but I think they did a pretty good job. I mean, I think my only gripe was apparently I've heard or I've read that there are some scenes that they should have kept in the movie to just better expand on certain characters, certain side characters, even some of the main characters, that the book did differently that would have probably gave maybe Dune Part One a little bit more of an edge. But again, it's not too much, where I would take points off for it. So, like I said, at the end of the day, for me, I'm giving Dune Part One a 10 out of 10 suns. I think it was absolutely phenomenal now that I think back at it, and it really just kind of encapsulates what we see in Dune Part Two, which I've just seen recently. And again, that is definitely a solid 10 out of 10. I think it's one of the best sequels that they've done when it comes to sci-fi and fantasy. It's in the conversation with like Star Wars Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, in the conversation for the Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers. I think it is a phenomenal sequel. I think it just builds upon the hype and what they did for Dune Part One. And yeah, obviously we're gonna get into Dune Part Two now. So I think what they did really well with Dune Part Two is that they continued to expand upon Paul's story, but they also expanded upon Jessica's story as well. Because like I said, Paul Atreides and Jessica learn to become Fremen, and they are slowly but surely accepted into Fremen culture. So obviously one of the positives right off the bat is that we see a more expansive deep dive into Fremen culture and society. We see that the Fremen are split between pretty much two hemispheres. And we see that the Southern Fremen are definitely more like religious, and they believe more in this like Lisan Kaib prophecy. And then we see that the Northern Fremen are kind of like more progressive and they don't really believe too much in that prophecy. They're more of like the younger population, and they just want to rid their world of any like foreign invaders. So we see a disconnect between, even the Fremen themselves. Obviously, we see Lady Jessica go from just, a simple Bene Gesserit to actually the Reverend Mother of the Fremen. We see her go through a spiritual journey herself, and she becomes a very powerful Bene Gesserit as the Reverend Mother of the Fremen. And then not only that, but she sort of kind of plants the seeds behind the scenes for her son Paul's eventual rise to power as the Lieutenant Gaib, and eventually, the Emperor of the Galactic Empire himself. So she does kind of turn more into that like maybe anti-hero. I don't think I'd really call her an antagonist, but she definitely was a main driving force behind the downfall of Paul Atreides. So I would definitely classify her more as that like anti-hero aspect. But it wasn't just her, obviously. We also see that because of the transformation that she goes through from Bene Gesserit to Reverend Mother, that she is pregnant at the time. So Paul does have a sister. She is not born during the film, but we see that the substance that she has to drink that comes from the sandworm actually awakens the conscience of her unborn child. So throughout the film, we actually see her having a conversation with her baby, which is very interesting because I mean, again, I haven't gotten that far in the book, but apparently Paul's sister and Jessica's daughter does play a pretty big part in the books. But obviously she is not born yet, which is something that the movie does differently from the books. Because obviously by the end of the Dune book, I believe she's already born. But obviously with Dune Part Two finishing up, she is not born yet. So I'm kind of curious to see how they're going to tackle that in Dune Messiah. Um, so yeah, so we see this really interesting change, kind of go over Lady Jessica, and she does become a more prominent figure in this movie, which I really enjoyed. And like I said, to kind of piggyback off of that, obviously we see Paul Atreides become a much more influential figure. So like I said, he was kind of, building into the prophecy as more of a political move. But we see that eventually, with his introduction into Fremen society, becoming a Fremen himself, falling in love with Chani and starting a relationship with her, really embracing himself in the culture and society, as well as just inhaling a huge amounts of spice, um, he starts to not only think politically, but he starts to think more religiously and culturally. He wants to become a Fremen. He doesn't want to become emperor or have anything to do with politics. He sees his dreams, he sees his visions. He knows that something terrible is going to happen if he plays upon these visions. So he wants to stay in the north of Arrakis, and he just wants to be a Fremen. He just wants to live with Chani peacefully, have a relationship, and help them fight back against the Harkonnens. However, we do see again, partly due to Lady Jessica, and then unfortunately just part to the visions himself, we see that the circumstances around him push what's going on in his life into that direction. So he's trying to avoid this outcome at all costs. And we see that unfortunately the events that are unfolding around him um, are pushing his visions to become reality. And this is where you really see the tragic nature of this character because here you have somebody that is trying to avoid a disastrous future at all costs, and we see that unfortunately the events that happen real world push him in that direction, and it comes full circle where it's not so much more of a tragic path anymore, but he sees it more as the only path to save humanity and the people that he cares about. um so very similar to Anakin Skywalker and Aaron Yeager, which obviously everybody compares Paul Atreides to. We see that the mindset shifts, and it's not so much more of a terrible nightmare, and that these visions are going to lead to disaster, but more of a these visions are the only way that I can ensure humanity survives, as well as the people that I care about. Obviously, he ends up doing some very horrific things, but in his mindset, it was necessary to ensure human survival and the people that he cared about. Very similar to Aaron and what he does with the rumbling, and obviously very similar to what Anakin does with his fall to the dark side and becoming Darth Vader. So they do a really great job of expanding onto his character. Um, Timothy Chalamet is just absolutely phenomenal as Paul. He has some really great scenes. I mean, some of the most memorable scenes of the film is when he rides a sandworm for the very first time, when he is at the Fremen War Council and he gives that huge speech on the very final climactic battle between, the Emperor's, um, guard and army versus the Fremen is really well done. And then overall at the very end, between Paul and I think Faith Raba is his name, which is Austin Butler's character from excuse me, from House Harnigan. Very well done, single combat fight between the two of them, which is really nice. So, kind of expanding upon that, we obviously are introduced to a couple of new characters, or not too many new characters. We have, God, what's her name? I'm forgetting her name. But we have Austin Butler playing Faith Raba, which is the nephew, to the who is he? I believe he is the Duke of House Harnigan. So he's the nephew of that Duke. Um, and he does a really good job playing the antagonist of the film. He is ruthless. He is psychotic. He has a great scene in a combat arena for his birthday. He's just a sick and twisted individual. And the Bene Gesserit try to use this to their advantage because they want to stop Paul. Or they heard rumors that he's alive still, so they want to possibly use Faith Rava as a way to create the Kwisatz Haderach. And obviously they send a Bene Gesserit member to kind of seduce him, and then she becomes impregnated. So Faith Raba is kind of part of this like overall Bene Gesserit plot that he doesn't really know about. Um, but his character is very interesting because, like I said, he has that basically all those terrible characteristics of House Harnigan, and then just like stepped up to like level 10, right? And he does some really substantial damage to the Fremen seats, or basically, the Fremen communities, which is a main reason why Paul ends up going down south and joining the Fremen War Council because basically Faith Raba made his visions come true, right? And like, because the Seath was destroyed, it gives him really no other choice. So you could really see these different characters, like, like Lady Jessica and Faith Robert, really just kind of pushing Paul to embrace what he doesn't want to embrace, which is again that more of that tragic nature for the character. You also see Florence Pugh, make her appearance as the daughter of the Emperor of, I believe, House Carino. So we see another house that is mentioned in the film. We're not really given too much information on the house itself, but we know that the Emperor and his daughter obviously come from that house. So they must be one of the major houses of the Dune universe. So we see that she is also being trained as a Bene Gesserit, very similar to Jessica. But we see that she also is a scribe because in the book, the Dune book, we actually see that each chapter opens up with a entry from her diary. So we see that she's not really too influential in the film, to be honest. She more just kind of shows the Bene Gesserit and like, their overall plan, showing how they kind of deviate and, take certain steps depending on like how events happen. Um, and we see that she is counseled, with advice on how to handle Araxis and the Lisan Gaib, because again, they don't know that it is Paul Atreides. They just know that this Fremen prophet is uniting the Fremen and giving House Harnakin a really hard time on Araxis. So, she gives counsel on how to deal with that. So we see that she does have like the political mind and intrigue of, a imperial court, or just a noble house. And then we see that she plays a big part, obviously, at the end of the film by sparing her father's life, by agreeing to willingly marry Paul Atreides, to spare her father's life. So again, she definitely is going to play more of a prominent role, in Dune Messiah, because obviously she is a big part of, what goes on in that. I'm not going to spoil anything for anybody. Um, but she does play a much more bigger part in Dune Messiah, so I'm excited to see how they really handle her character in that. Another really important character that they changed, in this film is Chani. Now they changed Chani, um, I feel like drastically a lot actually in the film compared to the books. From what I've understood in the books, she's very supportive of Paul. She does not mind of, his religious crusade, across the galaxy, and what he does, in that crusade. She doesn't mind that he marries, the daughter of the emperor. She's totally on board. Basically, like she is like the ride or die of Paul Atreides in the books, and we see that in the movie she's not. We see that he has her support as long as he doesn't change, and that is the main stipulation for her. She's like, "You will always have me as long as you don't change, as long as you stay who you are. The man that I fell in love with." And we see that as he slowly starts to embrace his visions and he goes down that darker path, so to speak, we see that she loses more and more of him, and then vice versa. He loses more and more of her. And eventually, obviously, when he defeats Faye Raba and takes, Florence Pugh's character as his wife, that's basically the last straw. And we see her like at the end of the film, basically calling a sandworm to go return to like, her Fremen community. So that is very interesting because we know that in the books, we know that, obviously her and Paul are in love and, they have a child, but then unfortunately that child, I believe, is assassinated. So they have another child and they actually have twins. But unfortunately, Chani dies in childbirth. But obviously she gives birth to Leto the second and, their daughter. I forgot what their daughter's name is. But obviously their son plays a huge part in the sequel trilogy of Dune. So it's interesting to see how her character is going to play out in Dune Messiah now that she is really not on board with what Paul Atreides is doing to the Fremen in his religious crusade. Um, but I think Zendaya does a phenomenal job in that role. I don't really mind the change too much because I'm actually more interested to see like how it's going to play out because obviously we've seen that Paul's sister is not born in this film, so we don't know what part she's going to play in Dune Messiah. Obviously, with Chani's loyalties being in question, we don't know what, part she's going to play in Dune Messiah. Um, and to kind of further expand upon Paul's sister, she was supposed to kill the Duke of House Harnakin, but we see that Paul himself does that. So, the question is, what part is she going to play in Dune Messiah? Um, so again, the film does a really good job of expanding upon, some of these newer characters and then even further expanding upon some of these characters that we already know. Obviously we see Gurney make an appearance again, and he just kind of becomes like, Paul's like, confidant and advisor, when it comes more to like, the politics of like, House Atreides and the noble houses. And we could even argue that he is a proponent in Paul's downfall as he starts to advise and take counsel more from him than he does Chani, in the Fremen. So we see that his loyalties are now becoming mixed between the House Atreides and the Fremen. Um, besides that, we see, obviously some members from House Harnakin, reappear. We see Dave Bautista's character reappear. He really isn't too prominent during the film. If anything, we see more of his downfall of his character and then eventually his death, by Gurney himself. Obviously, we see the Duke of House Harnakin, and we see that he is still scheming behind the scenes, and that he even has his own, personal agendas, besides the Emperor's. But we see that he meets his downfall at the hand of Paul Atreides. And speaking of House Harnakin, we find out some really important information in this film. we find out that Lady Jessica is actually the Duke of House Harneken's daughter, which makes obviously Lady Jessica Harneken, and that makes Paul Atreides half Atreides and then half Harneken. So in that final single combat scene, he faces off against his cousin, and then he kills his grandfather. So even though that obviously happens in the books, and we know that that's common knowledge in the books, it's really interesting how they introduced it in this film and how they um made Paul the one to kill the Duke instead of his sister. So again, that just kind of like begs the question, what role was she going to play in the films? Um, so if anything, the film not only does a good job of expanding upon these characters and building their stories and their personalities and their characteristics, and their development, but it also allows for a lot of questions to be answered, and that gives a lot of people hope and anticipation for the third and final film. Um, again, the cinematography and the soundtrack is absolutely perfect for this film. They knocked it out of the park, two times in a row. I have no gripes with them whatsoever. Um, Hans Zimmer does a fantastic job, like with the soundtrack, fantastic job. The music hits right in all the scenes that it should. And again, the end of the film leaves you wanting more. I don't really have any negatives. Again, I mean, this is not me saying that both these films were perfect. Because obviously they did deviate away from the books, so some people might have a problem with that. But again, because of my naivety to Dune and not really knowing too much about Dune myself, I'm not going to sit here and say that these films were perfect, but at least in my personal opinion, they were both 10 out of 10s. Because obviously a staunch believer about nobody's perfect, so not every film is perfect. But if I had to score these on more of a numerical level instead of just a 10 out of 10, these are definitely like 90s for me. These are definitely like in the 90s. These are definitely like 97s, 98s, where they're almost perfect. And then that's how I feel about these first two movies so far. And like I said, at the end of the day, I'm giving, Dune Part 2 a solid 10 out of 10 suns. I think these films were phenomenal. And like I said, I'm really excited for Dune Messiah. We don't have any release date or any information on the third and final film of the trilogy, but if they knock it out of the park, this is going to be one of the best trilogies of all time. And this is going to be a huge boost to the Dune franchise and bring in a lot of new, fresh fans and bring back some of those older fans. And like I said, with the success of this possible trilogy, that could lead to possible spin-offs with TV adaptations. I wouldn't say more novels, but maybe some more spin-off novels are written. And really, Frank Herbert gets the recognition he deserves. Um, he wrote his books with such confidence and such a symbolic message behind it, um, that I think a lot of people miss to this day. He does a really good job of subtly bringing the world of politics and religion into a sci-fi fantasy and showing how when it comes to some religions and some religious beliefs that blind fanaticism could lead to catastrophic events. So again, he does a really good job of even some environmental aspects he throws in there. He does a really good job of kind of putting those subliminal messages in the books without you even realizing it until you like watch a video of somebody like breaking it down. So at the end of the day, like I said, there's a lot to look forward to. I'm really excited to see where this franchise is going to go. And yeah, I mean, count me out, count me in for a fan of Dune. And I just can't wait to continue reading these books and getting both perspectives and seeing where this is going to take us. But with that being said, guys, on the off chance that I keep rambling, that is really going to do it for this episode. I pretty much just wanted to kind of cover both those films and just kind of generally talk about them. And, hopefully you guys will enjoy this. This was kind of new for me. So I appreciate all the love and support on this. Let us know if you want any more Dune content. Let us know if you want our lovely host to sit down and watch these movies. Um, because like I said, they were really good. Let me know if you want me to do some future videos on the prequel series that they are going to be doing on Max. And yeah, I'm just really excited to see where the future of Dune is going to go and how I'm going to enjoy it. So again, thank you guys so much for coming out to another wonderful episode of Two Sons Podcast. Like I said, I labeled all these social medias and the platforms that you could find us in the beginning of the video. So go check us out on those. I will schedule this episode to release tomorrow morning, which is going to be Friday, March 29th. So, like I said, um, we will possibly record tonight and do an episode on the Bad Batch. But if not, it might be out later in the week. But just check those socials and those platforms for any updates on that. But regardless of what happens, you guys will definitely have a video to watch tomorrow. So definitely, be on the lookout for that. So, with that being said, thank you guys so much for coming out to another wonderful episode of Two Sons Podcast, where I, your co-host, yours truly, talked about the Dune franchise and Dune Part 1 and 2. So please let me know in the comments down below what you guys have thought about these two movies so far, what you're excited to see. And yeah, with that being said, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Please be safe, whenever you're listening to this. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening. Please be safe. Do not do anything stupid. This weekend is Easter. So for those of you that celebrate Easter on Easter Sunday and Easter Monday, have a fantastic weekend with your family. Get some rest. Cherish your memories. Have a good time. And we will see you all in the next one. Goodbye for now.